Hello, everybody, and welcome back to coverage of Grand Prix Providence. I'm Gabby Sparts in the booth with Luis Scott Vargas, and we are heading into round 15. This is the very last round of Swiss. This will determine our top 8 today. Our main match is going to be Seth Manfield, who's currently sitting at 12-1-1, versus Lan Win, who's 12-2. Looks like the matchup is going to be Black-Green Delirium versus White-Blue Flash, and it seems like we've seen a lot of this in the feature match today.
Yeah, these are by far the two most successful decks that we've seen in the feature match. Part of it is that we have seen some of the same players go on a run, and so we've seen Seth, and Dave Shields multiple times. But part of it is that there's just a lot of White Flash and a lot of Black-Green Delirium decks here, and they are performing well. So we're going to see a match. The winner of this match, if Seth wins, he assuredly is in the top 8. If Lan wins, he looks like he will be as well. Seth actually would, I think, love to take a draw here, but Lan has apparently determined it is not safe for him to draw. So
yeah, and he's determined he has to play.
Yeah, the players are going to battle.
All right, so Seth Manfield's going to kick things off with a Vessel of Nascency, and Lan is going to follow up with a Selfless Spirit. We're going to pass the turn back to Seth and see what he follows up with. Yeah, and that's exactly the kind of thing he wants to play. He's going to follow up with a Grimflayer.
I really hope he takes the Grimflayer gambit. You attack with Grimflayer with a Vessel out, and you hope to get Delirium off cracking the Vessel.
That would be awesome.
it's a little risky, but it could happen.
It's funny because both players know that it could happen, and what are the odds that it does, but it's pretty funny if it does manage to go through. So it looks like the Selfless Spirit will not be blocking against that Grimflayer. It's going to attack Seth Manfield down to 18. All right, so Grimflayer getting in.
And Lan, if he has Spell Queller, he could try to block here, but it looks like he's not.
Yeah, he's decided not to, so he'll get to take a look at the top 3 of his deck. And both start fueling Delirium and deciding if he wants to leave anything on top.
Grimflayer, one of the rare, or in this case mythic, aggressive creatures that see play in an aggro deck, or in a control deck rather, because most of the time a deck like Seth's, which is legitimately just like a black-green control deck, it's still playing this 2-drop because Grimflayer has such a powerful effect and because it just works so nicely with other cards like Ishkanah and Traverse the Ovenwald.
So it looks like Seth says no to both, all 3 cards actually. He's going to be discarding all of them. He's going to follow up with a Pilgrim's Eye. But it does not resolve. It meets a Spell Queller instead.
And so Lan did not go for the ambush there of Spell Queller blocking Grimflayer, potentially out of fear of the Vessel being cracked, potentially out of fear of Seth having a removal spell.
Yeah, it was nice and patient. What do you think of that play?
This is certainly the safer play. The downside is that if Seth thinks Lan has a Spell Queller, Seth may not play anything on his turn and just leave mana up for Vessel of Nascency. So Lan was taking a bit of a gamble on mana while guaranteeing, or at least coming closer to guaranteeing, that he's not going to risk his Spell Queller into a removal spell. Also, Seth's very aware of Spell Queller, so if Seth attacks with that Grimflayer, I have to feel like he is factoring Spell Queller into his plans, and good chance he has something like Grasp of Darkness.
Well, it looks like Lan is going to continue developing this board with that Gideon, bringing a Knight ally, and getting in there with both spirits.
So now, Seth has 2 types towards Delirium. He has an instant and land. If he cracks Vessel, he has enchantment. So he has a very, very good odds of hitting the 4th type by cracking Vessel, which means that Grimflayer can attack Gideon. Problem for Seth is that he will then be obliged to crack Vessel if Land blocks with the Knight, which Land likely will because he doesn't want to lose Gideon. Mm-hmm. So it gives Seth a lot of reason to want to cast Grasp of Darkness on this Knight. If Seth has a 4th land and can go Grasp your Knight, land, crack Vessel, attack Gideon, that could be a very good turn for Seth. The downside being, if he actually somehow misses on Vessel, then it's a disaster. If he does not hit Delirium for Grimflayer and is not able to kill Gideon, things go quite poorly for Seth.
Oh, interesting. So it looks like the Grasp of Darkness is targeting that Spell Queller, bringing back that Pilgrim's Eye.
So Seth may not have had a 4th land to play, in which case he would want to grasp the Spell Queller first, play a land, and then attack with Grimflayer.
This Pilgrim's Eye getting to trigger gives Seth Manfield access to that swamp. He's going to go ahead and play it straight right there.
So Seth
And it looks like he is going to go ahead and crack that Vessel of Nascency. So let's see if he gets Delirium.
Looks like he does.
Oh, and Planeswalker too.
In spades. Seth actually, because he already has enchantment, instant, land in his graveyard, and now he flipped over sorcery, creature, planeswalker. He could end up with 6 types, though. To do so, he'd have to decline picking up the Grimflare or Liliana off Vessel. So, and there's a pretty good chance he wants one of those two rather than just another Vessel.
What do you think is the more appealing option here?
It's really going to depend on Seth's hand. Liliana strikes me as the most appealing because she can pick off Selfless Spirit. But there are arguments for Grimflare. It really, I mean, if Seth already has a Liliana, certainly Grimflare looks a little better. If Seth doesn't care about Selfless Spirit, then Grimflare also provides an advantage. The one card I'd be surprised if Seth takes would be the Vessel of Nascency.
All right, so it does look like the choice for Seth is going to be the Grimflare. And Grimflare gets to attack Gideon this time.
And now it's a 4/4 Grimflare, so Lan can throw a knight in front of the Grimflare in order to prevent 2 of the damage, leaving Gideon at 2, but then you can just make another knight next turn, so it's pretty advantageous to block here.
Yep, and that's exactly what it's going to do. So this will drop Gideon down to 2 loyalty, and then we're going to see a pass back to Lan. It is nice that Gideon is able to protect himself here, but this active Grimflare is proving to be a problem for Lan.
Yeah, Lan really needs to play something this turn that can deal with Grimflare, whether that be a Stasis Snare or Reflector Mage or potentially an Avacyn, though that gets countered by a lot of what Seth can do.
All right, so this Gideon's getting aggressive, taking up and entering the battlefield.
So Gideon's smashing for 5. Seth could dump Artifact in his graveyard if he really wanted to off the block with Pilgrim's Eye, but I think he's pretty close to... He already has Delirium, and he's close enough to Emrakul by the time he gets to Emrakul that I don't think he needs to worry about filling his graveyard right now for that.
So we'll see whether or not Seth chooses to block.
I mean, Seth could also just want 5 life, though. The fact that Pilgrim's Eye is keeping back Selfless Spirit is a good reason to keep the Pilgrim's Eye around right now. Anytime you get value off of Pilgrim's Eye like that, you feel great.
It's a sweet card. Looks like Lan is going to follow up with a Selfless Spirit.
Representing potentially a Spell Queller, potentially a Stasis Snare. And part of the reason this Blue-White Flash deck plays so well is that because all of its cards are basically at instant speed, it conceals what it has very, very effectively.
They also could be a counterspell, or they could be a removal spell, so they put you in this weird situation where you're not exactly sure what you're supposed to do. Like if you're putting them on something like Spell Queller and instead they had a removal spell, like that could be really bad for you.
Yeah, like if you decline to play a creature pre-combat because you're worried about Spell Queller, like a haste creature, for example, you attack and then they Stasis Snare you, then you wish you had played the creature pre-combat. On the other hand, if you do end up playing something pre-combat and they Spell Queller you, the reverse is true. So that is why instants are a powerful card type.
All right, so it looks like both creatures hitting the red zone. It looks like they're both going to be attacking Gideon.
And so Lan can't keep Gideon alive here unless he has something like a Stasis Snare or a Spell Queller.
All right, so that Gideon does go down.
And if he has Queller, he may have wanted to save it for this Grimflare anyway.
We'll see if this prompts something. So, Luis, the Gideon ticked up last turn and bashed for 5 instead of making a knight. And all it did is really like get in for a little bit of damage. Is that better than just having a knight here?
It depends on how aggressive Lan thinks he's going to be. I had gone into the turn kind of envisioning a knight being made by Gideon. That attack does indicate to me that Lan is interested in pressuring Seth. Looks like Seth has an upkeep effect. Seth very heavily representing Grasp of Darkness here. It'd be funny if he didn't cast it.
Yeah, indeed it is. So this is happening
during Lan's upkeep. Which is, wow. So Lan was very cognizant of Seth being able to have Grasp and didn't spell Queller Grimflare when Seth played it. So that was well played by Lan, and now he gets to knock Seth down to 5. And all of a sudden now Seth is very close to dying to Lan's 4 different flying creatures. He's got just that one Pilgrim's Eye to defend him.
Yeah, that was a really heads-up play.
Yeah, a lot of players would have snapped off Spell Queller on that Grimflare.
Well, that's delicious-looking bait if you've ever seen some.
Yeah, actually, if you look at Grimflare, it doesn't look that delicious. It looks pretty gross. But either way, Lan declined to Spell Queller the Grimflare, and that ended up working out a lot better. Yeah, look at that guy.
All right, he is pretty gnarly looking. You got me. Both Grimflares are going to be attacking here.
And someone asked why would you upkeep specifically the Grasp, and that's because Seth didn't want Lan to draw a Spell Queller, probably because Seth assumed Lan would have cast Spell Queller last turn if he had it.
Because of the Grimflare, right?
Exactly. You know, one of the things that we've seen as a theme over the course of the feature match area this weekend is players, particularly actually blue-white flash players, being rewarded for their patience, not attacking with Smuggler's Copter into open mana when it would be natural to attack, not using Spell Queller in this instance, saving their cards, and yeah, there are some payoffs for playing patiently.
All right, so after those 2 Grimflares connected, Seth got to take a look at a number of cards from top of his library and decided he wants to keep 1 on top and just 1.
Yeah, and he doesn't get to look at full 6. He looks at 3, makes his decisions based on those 3.
Right, and he kept the same 1 through the whole thing.
So he had some amount of repeats there.
Lan just taking a look at Seth's graveyard, which is now chock full of different types, and he's got to be thinking and worrying about something like Emrakul as well.
Yeah, if Seth's because remember Seth did hit Liliana, Seth could be creeping up towards enough types to play Emrakul on something like 7 mana.
All right, well, this Grasp of Darkness takes care of the Spell Queller, which also manages to take care of the Spirit.
Yeah, that was like we had said earlier in the weekend, a domino effect where you take out a Spell Queller and then the Grasp.
It's a house of cards,
yeah. And all of a sudden, Lan goes from having 3 flyers in play to having 1, with the Copter still representing lethal, so if Lan's able to play a creature and remove that Pilgrim's Eye as a blocker, which, he's got combinations of cards that do that. Reflector Mage does it by itself. He could attack Seth for lethal here.
Looks like Seth is going to follow up with a land here. Or maybe not.
And a pretty good chance that Seth is drawing either like a removal spell or an Ishkanah next turn, because there aren't very many different cards he would want to leave on top in the face of this flying onslaught.
All right, so 3 mana. What do you have in hand, Seth?
Tap 3 mana, adjust the hat. Tap 3 mana.
Seth, of course, our world champion from not this Worlds, but 2 Worlds ago.
Good coverage of that Worlds, actually. I remember covering his final match against Owen Turtenwald. It was an awesome match.
I wrote an article for Daily MTG about some of the best times moments at Worlds, and his reaction when he actually won, and then the interview where he was, trying to compose himself and actually talk about what this meant to him, and he was just unable to because it was clearly so meaningful to him. Was really moving.
Yeah, kind of like when Shota Yasuoka won Pro Tour Kaladesh last week.
Yes, exactly like that, except the total opposite. The Raven Inspector coming down for land. This will also provide him a clue and another card soon enough.
So one thing I've noticed when watching Seth play is, like, when he did something like tap those 3 mana and untap, I haven't seen him do that when he has nothing. He does tend to actually have a play at that point.
Yeah.
So now Lan has to think of, what does that mean? What could Seth have? What should I be worrying about? And maybe it is a bluff. Maybe Seth just is looking at all lands in hand and is just deciding, trying to sell something. But for the most part, you should pay attention to physical tells that your opponents do.
Paulo wrote a really good article, was it for CFB, about how to protect against the bluff, or like how to actually tell when your opponent legitimately has something.
Yeah.
And this was one of the situations that he talked about.
When you're playing against Seth Manfield specifically?
Yeah, specifically against him.
That's a kind of narrow article.
It looks like the 3-bit inspector jumping into the smuggler's copter. Copter getting into the red zone.
So Land's attacking with the copter, and Seth's just waiting because he wants to see if Land loots or not. And it's kind of on Land to declare, like, yes, I would like to draw an extra card and then discard a card off copter. So we'll see how this... It looks like if Land is letting Seth play something here, Land has passed the opportunity, or at least that, I believe, will be the topic of discussion, depending on how this next sequence plays out.
Okay, so then the 3 mana that Seth kept toying and not toying with is a murder. All right, so the Selfless Spirit is going to sacrifice itself to protect the copter.
Okay, so it looks like he's going to loot. That was in response to looting.
Mm-hmm.
Again, without hearing what the players are saying, it's a little hard to figure out which step they're on.
Seth Manfield is interested in protecting his life total. He's going to put the Pilgrim's Eye in front of the copter. Land's going to follow up with a land, and it's going to pass it back to Seth. And now Land was before sitting at a very comfortable life total, but now these green flyers are starting to really make a dent on his life total.
Yeah, the Hissing Quagmire plus the 2 Grimflayers does now represent lethal.
All right. And that'll do it. Seth Manfield here takes game 1 in round 15. He's well underway to trying to lock up this top 8.
And actually, looking more at the standings, there's actually a chance Seth declined the draw because he will be in with a loss and maybe is playing for a higher seed. So there's a chance that Seth could lose in the top 8.
Interesting.
Here. But it is to your advantage to be a higher seed. The higher seed in the top 8 chooses to play or draw. And by that I mean play.
Yes.
And given how fast this format is, and that is a significant advantage.
All right, let's peek over and take a look at Osip Lovetovic versus David Gross, or Gross maybe? At 12-2, both players are actually at 12-2. So do you think this locks one of the players?
A win would lock one of the players.
Yes.
This also actually looks like a match that could potentially draw into top 8, but again, the players will have determined that for themselves. Red-white vehicles here playing against blue-white flash. So this is a matchup we've seen play out a number of times. We saw Pat Cox lose this matchup last round on the vehicle side, and looks like David is up a game here.
Yeah, so it looks like the Toolcraft Exemplar is able to trade with a Selfless Spirit, and Osip is going to continue developing his board. Let's see what David can manage. He just plays a land and passes.
So he's got Westvale Abbey up now, but he is somewhat behind here because Osip just has a number of cards in hand, and he even has this Needle Spires if he wants to start getting in there with that. We saw Osip activate Needle Spires, then decide not to, and it looks like the Needle Spires is going to end up being activated.
All right, so it looks like David is going to be activating this Westvale Abbey, and we'll get a token momentarily. All right, so this Cleric is getting ready to block. So Reflector Mage in front of the Needle Spires. The Toolcraft Exemplar is getting the bonus because of that clue that's sitting on the right side of the battlefield.
Yeah, so David has incentive to either not block the Toolcraft Exemplar or block with Reflector Mage. And now actually Selfless Spirit could do some work here if David chose to use it.
All right, so he's not going to use the Selfless Spirit. It's instead going to let it go. Osip's going to follow up with a Mountain and pass it back to David.
So Westvale Abbey doing a little bit of work here, protecting David from when he's a little flooded out. But Osip is still in a better position, and especially if he's adding a larger threat to the board here.
All right, so Needle Spires, Thraben Inspector. It looks like the Selfless Spirit staying at home.
Yeah, there's a good chance Osip just doesn't want to trade Selfless Spirits and is worried about something like, well, Spell Queller.
Mm-hmm. So Spell Queller not getting to eat a spell, not in the situation, but attempting to eat this Thraben Inspector.
And David has a lot of life to play with here. He's falling from 18 to 14 based on this Needle Spires, which still leaves him in a spot where he's got plenty of draws, and now that he's got Spell Queller and Selfless Spirit ready to go, he's actually stabilized his board fairly well. Osip actually looks like he's a little land heavy as well, so just, the fact that Osip played 2 more lands and then a Spell Queller ate a Thraben Inspector, tilted this game from being somewhat in Osip's favor to, I think, being in David's favor again, even though it is quite close. A Gideon or a Chandra or a DePaula, all these kind of cards from Osip could once again swing the pendulum.
All right, so it looks like that Spirit getting in there. And just a straight pass back. Osip's going to take this opportunity to draw a card.
I'm a big fan of that, taking the opportunity to draw cards.
It's pretty good.
Oh, Osip's hand went from not much to great.
Yeah, he found something off the top. It looks like it's a Pianalar. Along she brings a little Thopter as well. And 2 more mana is going to also add a Smuggler's Copter to this board. And there it is, Smuggler's Copter. We're going to see a pass back to David. Continuing to make clerics, but it seems like he might just be flooded and sitting on a couple lands.
Yeah, something like an Avacyn would definitely be difficult for Osip to deal with. Osip has a Declaration in Stone in hand, but like Avacyn, for example, would flash in and make combat go well for David, and even a post-combat Declaration wouldn't be that bad. But it looks like David's got Plains and Westvale Abbey in hand, and if that's the case, then the Smuggler's Copter combined with other attackers is going to make things pretty difficult for David, because in such a close game when both players are, really racing to draw 1 or 2 extra spells, Smuggler's Copter is just absurd.
Mm-hmm. We're also seeing the power of a card like Needle Spires, because it's, technically it's just a dual land, but multiple times this game it's just served as another pretty good attacker.
Yeah, lands that have abilities in the late game are really powerful, so having Westvale Abbey or Needle Spires in your deck is a big advantage.
So this game is still going to be a while. Let's move back to our main match in the meantime and see the conclusion of Seth Manfield versus Lan Win. Looks like we just have a Smuggler's Copter on one side of the battlefield, and oh, what a treat. We get to see all of Lan's hand. Let's see, it's 2 Gideons, Summary Dismissal, and a couple lands.
Not the best hand, and in fact, Lan is really hoping to peel a creature to animate that Smuggler's Copter.
Mm-hmm.
But still, a fine hand to keep, assuredly, but Lan is not excited about missing basically his 3rd creature drop.
So he has a little bit of a transgress insurance here, since Lan will continue to keep the other Gideon. However, he was not able, don't think he was able to peel a creature for turn 3, and the Copter sitting there doing not a lot. Another transgress from Seth.
The second transgress is much better than the first. The first one took the backup Gideon, and Lan probably was thinking, okay, sure, as long as I can play a Gideon turn 4, I'll be happy. The second transgress took the only other Gideon, and all of a sudden, Lan is sitting with a Smuggler's Copter and nothing to do.
This is rough, too, because all of his hand is so reactive at this point. All right, well, Reflector Mage coming down for no value, but being able to crew the Smuggler's Copter and continuing to help Lan find a little bit more action.
When looking at Reflector Mage, you can pretend the text box is just blank, because this was a 3-mana 2/3 that immediately drove the Copter over to Seth's side of the battlefield.
Yep. Lan is going to discard that Plains. And a Mind Rack Demon coming down for Seth. Let's see. We do not.
His 3 types
so
and
close.
3 types.
Wow.
Is sorceries, enchantments, and creatures. So Seth is going to lose 4 life at the beginning of his upkeep, given that he does not currently have Delirium here. And this is where even discounting the life loss from Mind Rack Demon, a second Reflector Mage would be really good here.
Well, He has a second answer to it, and that's a declaration in stone. Seth will not be taking any damage, but he does lose his 4/5 flyer.
Yeah, that was also pretty good, even though Seth knowing that Lan has summary dismissal in hand is just not great for Lan, and I think Lan at some point has to give some thought to discarding it to Smuggler's Copter. If he's got excess lands, that's fine, because he doesn't really need a 5th land right now, but summary dismissal is a 4-mana counter, and Seth can just play around it, given that he knows it's there.
All right, so Seth is going to start things here with a Tireless Tracker and another land to bring another clue as well. So we're going to go back to Land's turn, and let's see if he finds anything meaningful on top. We know about that summary dismissal in hand. The Copter's getting crude, bashing in for 3. And another Copter is being discarded. He chooses to make his land drop for the turn, so we know at least one of those cards is a summary dismissal.
And even though Seth knows about it, Lan is winning on board, so Lan has that going for him. But Seth has a lot of ways to spend his mana at instant speed. Like if Seth has Grasp of Darkness and like a land, he could just attack with Tireless Tracker, crack one of the clues, and on Lan's turn cast Grasp. Lan casts Summary Dismissal, and Seth just untaps and resolves the spell he wants to resolve.
All right, so Seth took that opportunity at the end of Lan's turn to draw a card, and now in this turn he's going to play a Pilgrim's Eye. See if it resolves. It does seem like Seth is trying to just, knowing that the summary dismissal is there, is like, yeah, you can counter this if you want.
What would be really funny is if Lan attacks with Smuggler's Copter, the loot triggers on the stack, Seth casts Grasp, Lan casts Summary Dismissal, it also exiles the loot trigger.
All right, so it looks like Lan is going to let it go, and so Seth is going to be able to get that swamp. Let's see what he wants to follow up with. He will have some time to crack these clues if he so chooses to. Yep, it looks like he's going to be cracking one, counter on Tireless Tracker, and draw an extra card. And it looks like the Tireless Tracker is the only creature getting in.
If Lan really felt like it, he could counter a clue being cracked with Summary Dismissal, but not the most effective
Feels
use.
bad, man.
Yeah. This is feeling like the first game where Lan's just going to be a little short when it comes to damage.
Well, the Tireless Tracker is doing good work.
Yeah, the Tireless Tracker is pressuring Lan. It's hitting harder than the Smuggler's Copter. And it's also... so this could be interesting. Seth has Natural State here, and he casts Natural State on the Copter in response to the Crew trigger. Then even if Lan has Summary Dismissal, that drawback of Summary Dismissal comes into play. It'll exile the Crew ability as well.
All right, so Natural State targeting the Copter. Let's see what Lan wants to do about this. So you see Natural State. It's an instant. Destroy target artifact or enchantment. Convert a mana cost 3 or less.
Kills Smuggler's Copter, Stasis Field, Quarantine Field. Or Stasis Snare, rather. And lots of utility just on killing those things. Cultivator's Caravan.
Yeah, there are a lot of targets in the standard format for Natural State. Pretty good option for the green decks. All right, so Summary Dismissal is going to stop that from happening, but also going to stop that Copter.
Yeah, so once again, the Copter is not a creature right now because the Crew ability was on the stack when Seth cast Natural State, and the Summary Dismissal, it's indiscriminate. It exiles all other spells, counters all abilities.
So it is a little bit awkward because even though he was able to protect the Copter, he's still behind on board. Let's see what Seth can follow up with.
Seth now firmly winning this race.
Another swamp is going to get another clue. Looks like Tireless Tracker is going to be attacking. And Pilgrim Eyes stays at home. And the second follow-up is going to be a Liliana, the Last Hope. She takes up 2 target that Reflector Mage.
And the Reflector Mage now too weak to get in the copter. Can no longer crew it.
So it looks like Seth is drawing cards now. Multiple cards. Oh, it was at the end of the turn. All right, so we're going to untap for Seth. And yeah, we don't know what land has in hand, but things are looking grim.
Yeah, land passed so quickly there that it seems unlikely that he's got a lot going on.
All right, so another clue for Seth. And these creatures are going to be presumably on blocking duty for land.
And Seth might be moving to the spot where he can -2 Liliana to get back a creature here too. He's got a lot of mana. Might have something he wants to do with it.
All right, so it looks like this Reflector Mage might be jumping in front.
Tireless Tracker currently hitting for 7, could hit for 8 at most. So this isn't lethal, but if land takes this hit, he sets himself up to where Seth might be able to kill him with either another Tireless Tracker hit or potentially even just like a Hissing Quagmire hit.
All right, so Reflector Mage is jumping in front of the Tireless Tracker, and down it goes to the graveyard. Liliana ticking down, just as you said. Let's see, and looks like Ishkana is a creature of choice for Seth.
Do you think Seth wants to close out this game with a bit of reach?
I think he will, actually. Oh, Summary Dismissal. I guess he's not going to be closing out this game with any reach.
Land was prepared for that. But Land is also still dying very quickly to the Tireless Tracker and just finds himself short on creatures to animate the Smuggler's Copter. He just looks like he just has lands.
Yeah, he just passed the turn immediately. Seth continuing to draw cards. And the Tireless Tracker with 5 counters now.
Oh yeah, she is living up to her name. An 8/7 Tireless Tracker. Actually, I mean, Seth has lethal in multiple different ways, and he almost assuredly has answers for almost anything land could play here.
So another Tireless Tracker added to the battlefield, and Seth is just going for all the value. 2 trackers gives him 2 clues. That Tireless Tracker getting in.
Looks like an Archangel Avacyn.
So this buys him some time, potentially. Depends on what Seth has in hand.
If Seth has Grasp, he has... he doesn't have lethal because the Smuggler's Copter.
He has a Murder with a trigger on the stack. That does get to crew the Copter, though.
And it will be an indestructible Copter thanks to Avacyn's ability.
All right, you live to see another day, Copter. Get in front of the Tireless Tracker. Land also gets to loot and discards that Port Town. Definitely doesn't need any more lands at this point. Liliana ticking up. Following up with another Pilgrim's Eye.
Yeah, and Seth is in the kind of spot where even if Land is able to keep himself alive with plays like that Avacyn, it's really hard to imagine the sequence that can let Land back in the game.
Yeah, Land had only 2 lands in hand, so we see the handshake in Seth Manfield. He should be good for this top 8. Congratulations to him. And do you think there's a chance potentially that Land can still make it?
If all the 36 pointers play, it's possible that someone sneaks in, but that seems unlikely to occur. I think that Land has to just cross his fingers and hope. Nothing else he can do from here, but it's not super likely that a 12-3 ends up sneaking in.
Yeah, well, congratulations to him, though. This is an amazing run for sure. This is a cool deck, the White-Blue Flash deck. Luis, when White-Blue Flash is as dominant as it is, what do you think are some good ways to fight it?
It's looking like the Black-Green Delirium decks, the bigger curve ones, are actually pretty solid because Ishkana can't get countered by Spell Queller and it clogs up, well, the skies. And you've got a lot of instant speed interaction. Having cards like Grasp of Darkness and Murder instead of sorcery speed cards is really good. Also, Liliana, The Last Hope, kills Selfless Spirit. So overall, we've seen Black-Green perform pretty well against Blue-White in general. And so I'd be interested in seeing how that matchup develops as people tune both their decks to beat each other. That makes sense. So we're moving over to Osip Levitovich versus David Gross.
And Osip is up a game here.
Yeah,
And is also up on this board.
This looks like the same game that David was somewhat losing when we left, and his life total has diminished severely. He's still got a lot of lands in play, but he does at least have a smuggler's copter, maybe trying to get him back into the game.
Yeah, and these are the needle spires we were also talking about before, continuing to get in. Looks like we're going to see some crewing, and 3 creatures here hitting the red zone. All right, so Osip gets to do some looting here before going to blocks. It looks like a Toolcraft Exemplar. And when your opponent starts discarding real cards, that's how you know things are looking a little bad.
Yeah, Raven Inspector and Toolcraft Exemplar. Yeah, 1-drops aren't the strongest on turn 8, but those cards are definitely not lands. And they are they're definitely spells that would have an impact here, especially like Raven Inspector. So if you're David, you have to put Osip on having 2 relevant spells in hand.
So this drops David down to 3, and he is going to take an opportunity to make a human cleric, but this also costs him life. So it looks like the cleric is going to be jumping in front of that needle spires and the spell queller, blocking the smuggler's copter and the stasis snare. Going to stop the last attacker. So he's staying alive, but he's going to need help.
Yeah, the needle spires gets to eat the cleric, the copter gets to eat the spell queller, and that puts David in a spot where every turn he's just, losing cards to stay alive, but not actually progressing.
Yeah, this is one of those situations where you're playing to not die, right? But you're not in a winning proposition in any way. Oh, and he even gets to add taking a declaration in stone to take out that cleric. And let's see if David can top anything here. So many lethal attackers on the other side of the battlefield. David's going to pass back to Osip. Looks like that needle spires might be getting in here. Oh, and it looks like he has a Fleetwheel Cruiser too, actually.
Osip has a lot of different paths to victory
yes,
here.
He does.
And I think he probably feels that David's just making him play it out, for good form. Definitely nothing wrong with that. But Osip just has to now figure out, like, all right, how can I lose this game? Do I have, what are my best ways to get out of here? What can I
play around? That sort of thing too. So Fleetwheel Cruiser currently on the stack. Let's see if David can muster anything against this. He says, okay. Down comes a Fleetwheel Cruiser. No more cards for Osip, but we're going to see a big attack.
Osip just, worrying about Archangel Avacyn here, but that would still just provide 1 blocker because the Smuggler's Copter wouldn't be able to block.
Yeah, so the veteran motorist is jumping in that copter, and then we're going to see an attack from all the creatures. Trigger the smuggler's copter. He has no cards in hand, so he immediately has to discard a Depala. Does David have something here? It's Archangel Avacyn.
Archangel Avacyn.
And
I would expect the following to be the handshake.
well, he's crewing. I think he's crewing the copter. All right, there you go. That's the handshake. And Osip probably moves on to the top 8 here, right?
Yeah, Osip locks up the top 8 plus Pro Tour invite, guaranteed even if he were to miss. But at 13-2, he's going to make top 8. So
awesome.
A return to the Pro Tour for a Pro Tour champion.
Fantastic. Congratulations to Osip. All right, and that's going to do it here for round 15 at GP Providence.